Good evening, viewers, and welcome to the second session of the Satyajit Ray Centenary Lecture hosted by the Department of Film Studies, Jadavpur University. We started the Ray Centenary celebrations with a two-day seminar in March this year. As part of the second chapter, this lecture series began with Dudley Andrew and James Younger in October. We are extremely happy to present Professor Supriya Chaudhuri as the second speaker today in the lecture series. I would now request my colleague, Professor Moinak Bishwas, to introduce the speaker and begin the proceedings of the evening. And I'll also request Professor Madhuja Mukherjee to moderate the discussion after the lecture. Moinak.
Thank you, Olindo. Can you admit the people who are coming in while I speak? Olindo, can you do that?
Okay. Yeah, I will do so.
Right. After that, I'll take care of it, after I finish. It is an occasion of pleasure and privilege for us to present Supriya Chaudhuri to you this evening. She has had a long relationship with the Department of Film Studies. She has presented papers at our annual seminars and written for our journal, the Journal of the Moving Image. She also taught a few classes when we launched the department in 1993. Supriya Chaudhuri is Professor Emerita of English at Jadavpur. Besides teaching in Presidency College and at Jadavpur University, she has held visiting teaching positions at University of Cambridge, University of Paris Sorbonne, University of Virginia, and in other places. And she has served on various national committees on education. Her scholarship is relatively wide, which makes it difficult to outline her work in a brief introduction. She has specializations in European Renaissance literature, philosophy and history of ideas, Indian modernism, material cultures and urbanism, and translation studies, among other things. She has taught and written about all these subjects. Besides, she has essays and book chapters on food, sports, travel, and cinema. At least two of her cinema essays are on Satyajit Ray. Professor Chaudhuri, I might mention here, is also a university half blue in badminton from University of Oxford and black belt karate rank 2 holder from the International Karate Organization of Japan. There are few people better equipped to speak on a multifaceted man. Over to you, Supriya.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Yes. Thank you very much, Moinak and Olindo. It's an honor to be asked to speak on Satyajit Ray at the Department of Film Studies in Jadavpur University. As Moinak said, had a long association with this institution, with the department, and it's always a pleasure seeing old friends again. Especially, some friends who have been students in the past and are now teaching in the Department of Film Studies. And so thank you, everyone who is here. I recognize many familiar faces. I think I should not waste too much time. I'll launch my paper, which is called Being and Seeing, Tools of the Visible in Satyajit Ray's Devi. I'm sure most of us are aware that in 1960, just over 60 years ago, 3 remarkable films were released within the space of a few months in Calcutta. Satyajit Ray's Devi in February, Hrithik Ghatuk's Meghe Dhaka Tara in March, and Mrinal Sen's Baishe Shravan. Of these, Ghatuk's Meghe Dhaka Tara, sometimes translated as the cloud car, rather needlessly poetic translation, I think, is indisputably one of the greatest films ever made and has attracted extraordinary and sustained attention. By contrast, the other two, that is to say, Satyajit Devi and Mrinal Sen's Vaishis Rahu, are regarded as relatively minor elements of major cinematic oeuvres, and I don't know of any serious analysis of the three together as inhabiting the same historical moment. So there are some comparisons of the first two because both directors draw upon the image of the mother goddess Durga. And there are, I think there's a body of writing on this. But I am not attempting that exercise here. My focus is on Devi, one of a number of films in the 3 years between 1908 and 1961, apart from Opur Shanshar, The World of Opur, which was released in 1959, where Rai chose to work with material taken from the genre of the short story, perhaps as a release from the exacting nature of his engagement with Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's news in the Opur trilogy. There is an intricate, often quite visible web of material connections between the films of this period, that is, more or less the 3 years between 58 and 61. The most obvious being the use of the decaying Nimkita Palace or Rajbahil or Jalshaghar, 1958, the music room, Baby, 1960, Shami, and some interior scenes of Munihara from Teen Kunna, Three Daughters in 1951, and some views from the terrace in the documentary Rabindranath Tagore, also 1961. I owe this information to Pundit Anindo Banerjee. The same actor, you have the use of the interior settings repeated in film after film. Often this is simply an economy of material pertinences where you cannot go to new places or to different places. And there are also the same actors. Chobi Vishwash in Porosh Pathor, 1958, The Philosopher's Stone, in Jalshaghar and Devi, Soumitra Chatterjee and Sharmila Thakur in Opur Shanshar, and Karuna Bondhe from Aparajito, Soumitra in Samapti for that matter. And of course, the cinematography of Subrata Mitra, right through from Pather Pachali to Devi, to be replaced by Shomindu Rai in Tinko. Now, I'm drawing your attention to this because quite apart from the themes that bind Devi and Jalshaghar together, I think that the material constituents processes of recognition are an important factor in our reception of cinematic protocols, film language. In an interview recorded by Sham Beninger, Rai spoke of his fascination with the visual aspect of opulence and specifically mentioned both Charulata and Munihara with Jalshaghar in the text. And he might also, of course, mentioned Devi and Korebai as films that are obsessed with surfaces, objects, things. I will perhaps come back to some points here later. Devi is based on a short story by Prabhat Kumar Mukhopadhyay, dating from 1899, that's a very early period of the short story Bengal. Pranav had just about written his first decade's worth of shorties at that time. And it is set, the short story text itself is set 100 years earlier in the late 18th century. Its plot was taken from a real life incident possibly suggested by Rabindranath Tagore himself. Rai, in his film, advanced the historical setting to the 1860s, perhaps to sharpen the ideological conflicts between father and son, and to make them intellectually legible through a kind of cultural shorthand of the kind that we see employed in Charulata, where the dialogue with Bankim Chandra's essay Prachina or Nobina, the traditional woman and the modern woman, is, as Moinak Bishwash noted in an essay written many decades ago, I think, used to trace the formation of the colonial side. Snow Rai himself, writing in Sight and Sound in 1982, commented on the work that needed to be done Western viewer to understand this cultural shorthand, and that is to grasp the meaning of Devi, though I'm not fully in agreement with him here. In Rai's film, the father, the Zamindar Kalikinkar Chaudhary, by the way, a short story he's called Rai, so many commentators refer to him as Rai. But in the film, it's quite clear that the young man, Uma Prasad, addresses his letters to himself as Uma Chaudhary. This Zamindar is a man of immense learning and piety, and a lifelong devotee of the goddess Kali. His younger son, Uma Prasad, a student in Calcutta, appears in the film, come under the influence of Raja Rammohun Rai's Brahmat. He advocates widow remarriage. We may remember that the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act was passed in July 1856. And he is derisively referred to by his father as a Christian. Now, these details are obviously not part of the story's late 18th century setting, which, opening with a romantic nighttime scene in the bed of Uma Prasad and Doyan, his young wife, and emphasizing the sexual awake both parties, moves swiftly on the very next morning to Kalikinkor's dream vision of Doyan as the mother goddess, Shakti, Kali, or Durga, and his enshrining of her immediately in the puja room to receive worship. And this is more or less the plot of Dev, that the father-in-law has a dream in which he sees his young-in-law in the person of the goddess and immediately enshrines her as an object of devotion. Now, in fact, despite the story's brevity and the need that Rai clearly to flesh out many of the sequences in order to make a full, around 100 minutes, 99-minute feature film, the character of Doyan receives a considerable degree of textual attention from the original, especially in Doya's gradual submission to belief in her own God. Most striking and different from the film is the shock that the young secluded bride, having come into the presence, we are told, of her father or elder brother-in-law, feels at being unveiled and exposed to the public, and the transformation of her public aspect to a state of distraction that ironically mocks or the appearance of the goddess Kali. And I will read the passage in Bangla and then translate it into English. সে 2 দিন আগেও এ বাটির বধূ শ্বশুর ও ভাসুরের সাক্ষাতে বাহির হইত না, এই সমস্তই বিস্মৃত হইয়াছে। এখন তাহার মুখে অবগুণ্ঠন নাই, যাহার তাহার পানে শূন্য দৃষ্টিতে পাগলিনীর মতো চাহিয়া রক্তবর্ণ চোখ খুলিয়াছে, বেশবাস সুসংগৃত নয়। Just the other day, I'm translating, just the other day she was a bride in this household, never appearing with father or elder brother-in-law. All this is forgotten. Now her face is unveiled. She looks at any and everyone with an empty stare, like a madman. Her eyes are red and puffed, her clothes indisciplined. Now, within days of her deification, Umaprasad asks her husband, Umaprasad, asks her to run away with him. And Doya, certain in her heart that she is otherwise, agrees to go. But in the week that intervenes before Umaprasad can make the necessary arrangements, Doya is swayed by apparent proofs of her miraculous healing powers and refuses to join him. And that she's uncertain, asks Umaprasad not to touch her and tells him that he failed to understand. And again, I'm just reading 2 lines of dialogue. Umaprasad says, Turi hole emon pashani hote na. And Dayamoi answers, Ogo, tumi amake bujhte parle. Umaprasad says, if you were a goddess, you would not be so stony-hearted. And Daya answers, you have never understood. Now, see that even within this brief narrative exposition, despite her subjection to a patriarchal regime of misrecognition and tyranny, about which the author is unequivocal, Doya is emphatically the subject, if not the agent of her story. Believing in her divine powers, she takes sole charge of her sick nephew, Koka, even when her father-in-law, responding to his elder daughter in tears and pleading, asks whether a physician should be summoned. And so she refuses to allow a physician to be summoned. And she commits suicide in the puja room after Koka's tragic death and her own realization of her failed godhead. It's no part of my purpose here today to compare the story with the film. I offer these details simply in order to register the written text's purposive, skeptical, narrative logic, which is to me to be quite remote from the film's visual logic, even when textual phrases or metaphors are echoed or deliberately recalled. For example, a song that Rai wrote himself for Nibaron after his grandson is restored to life, Ebar Tore Chinechi Ma, with its play on stony-heartedness. Je bole ma tui pashani, tare ami dekub mani, ami mone jani prane jani, taner olki mokhi. I know in my heart, people call you stony-hearted, but I know in my heart what power that stone has. And Umaprasad, towards the close of the film, accuses his father with having laid a stone on his wife's heart. He says to her, আপনি আমার স্ত্রীর উপর দেবিত্ব আরোপ করে তাকে তার বুকে পাথর চাপাতে, তার বুকে পাথর চাপাতে। Now, these echoes, which I think are deliberately intended by Rai, but that certainly they're not intended to turn back to the short story, which Rai has decisively left behind him in making this film. Viewers of Baby, like myself, may be alternately drawn in and disturbed by the film's deliberate scopophilia, its obsession with programs of sight that are worked into its representation of elaborate rituals of Hindu goddess worship, to which darshan, seeing, is central. During the Durga Puja, with which the film opens, the goddess's awakening is a phased process. From Chokkudan, the painting of Durga's 3 eyes on Mahalaya, the last day of the previous lunar fortnight, to Bodhon or Pran, the summoning of or infusing of life into the clay on the 6th day of the puja, Shushti. But what needs to be emphasized, and the scopophilia of the film has been discussed at length by many scholars. I can recognize one in this audience here. what needs to be emphasized, especially because of a now somewhat outdated preoccupation days in film theory, that darshan is always a two-way process, seeing, but also, more importantly, being seen by the deity. In the film's title credits and its opening sequence, showing the family Durga Puja, almost the first word uttered in the film is Uma Prasad's exclamation, Oi dakho, look, to his little nephew. But the question was, having viewed the title sequence and the scenes of the goddess being worshipped, the question we ask is, who is looking? What is being seen? So I'd like to request Onindo now to run clip 1 and clip 2 in succession, please. These are the title sequence and just a little bit of the first scene with mid-crane shots by Subrata Mitra during the Visarjan ceremony. So if you could use
I'm already sharing.
We
It
can't.
is showing. Okay.
Okay, should come. Do it again. Come out of the box. Screen. Don't worry. If you fail, I'll do it from my end.
Okay.
Are you running it in Chrome?
Yeah.
And share a tab. Yes, now it's coming. Can we have full screen?
Thank you. Thank you. We missed a little bit at the start because I wanted to start with the unpainted face. Those of you who've seen the film will remember that it starts with the unpainted face and then the eyes are painted in. But anyway, let's move on. The beautifully painted eyes of the goddess gaze impassively at worshippers, witness the upturned gaze of Kalikinkor and his elder son Tarakrusha. Witnessing too the act of ritual sacrifice of a goat or a buffalo, the story tells us with evident distaste that Dayamoyi was witness many of these, though Rai doesn't incorporate this detail. But the question that obviously is uppermost in the minds of the devout is, does the goddess look at them? The gaze empty or full? Does it recognize the worshipped devotion or remain aloof? What the worshipper desires, and this is a film about desire, sexual desire, as well as the desire of the numinous, of access to the divine in the optical imaginary, is the full reciprocity of the gaze, of seeing and being seen, Devi Darshan. Hindu idol worship, it must be recognized at once physical and numinous, obsessed with presence as it repeatedly registers absence. In the brilliant first scene, all this, presence and absence, are in doubt. The goddess's eyes look straight ahead, then downwards, and then finally, after her immersion in the river, they gaze upwards until they are swallowed up by the water, and her image returns to the of which it was made. Next to these images of the goddess looking or not looking are images of Dayamoyi, veiled, demure, but still self-possessed and self-aware, who is seen by us looking at her husband, gazing into her nephew's eyes, but looking away from her father-in-law. And I'm speaking of the succession of scenes that follow. Her eyes cast, the end of her drawn firmly over her face as he speaks affectionately to her and she massages his feet. A traditional practice of Padoshiva, as Rai was careful to point out, though the original story seems to rule out any such service. What Kalkinkor desires still is the full reciprocity of the gaze that I've spoken of. And it's answered that night after Daya has left, after giving her father-in-law his medicine and massaging his feet. That night, Daya's eyes replace those of the goddess and look directly at him in his dream. There's a clip here, and if it's possible, it's just 1 minute. Anindo, will it take too much time? Can we show it? Clip 3. Clip 3. I don't think there's any dispute about the nature of Kali Kinkor's desire here, a sexual desire that takes the appearance of spiritual hunger and must be deeply misrecognized in order to be acknowledged and validated in practice. At the close of the clip you just saw, you will have noted that the painting of Kali on the wall is blurred, while the portrait of Kali Kinkor's dead wife looks censoriously at her dead husband. In fact, the image of Kali in the puja room, too, her eyes wide open or wide shut, it is not clear which they are, is only visible before and after Dayamoyi's brief elevation to divinity. Earlier scene lays out the ceremonial objects for her father-in-law's mourning rites, and Nibaron is singing a Ramprasadi outside, in which the devotee fondly accuses the god of shutting her eyes and ears to the worship. Mama bole ar dakbo na. There's a clip here again. It's a very beautiful scene, but I am particularly interested in Rai's use of this Shadi song. The goddess is accused of shutting her eyes, not looking at the worship. So if we could have that clip, please.
ডাকি বারে বারে মামা বলিয়ে মা কি রয়েছ চক্ষু করুণে ডাকি বারে বারে মামা বলিয়ে মা কি রয়েছ চক্ষু কর্ণ খেয়ে মা বিদ্যমানে এ দুঃখ সন্তানে মা বিদ্যমানে এ দুঃখ সন্তানে মা মলে কি ছেলে বাঁচে না মা মা বলে আর ডাকবো না দিয়েছ দিতেছ কতই যাতনা মা মা বলে ঘরে ঘরে যাব ভিক্ষা মেগে খাবো ঘরে ঘরে যাব ভিক্ষা মেগে খাবো মা বলে যাক বলে যাব না মা মা বলে আর ডাকবো না দিয়েছ দিতেছ কতই যাতনা মা মা বলে।
Thank you. But it is only in his dream, of course, that Kali Kinkor obtains what he so desires, the return of the gaze, Devi Darshan. The physical body of Daya, ensconced on a platform in the puja room, is recorded as increased, weary, and spent. Her eyes look down, away, fixedly at nothing, until in that first sequence she faints and is declared by Kali Kinkor to have passed a state of trance, Samadhi. Now, who or what is Daya here? And how is she caught transfixed in this passage of looks? Contrary to any unavoidable identification kind suggested unmet between the camera and the human eye, think that the camera's apparently neutral, disembodied, objective gaze is felt by us, viewers of the film, as paralyzingly other, exterior, and coercive, even when it is sympathetic to Daya's bodily distress. Apparent, for example, to her sister-in-law Horosundari, who is watching the interior window. This is a powerful reminder of the disjunction of the camera eye. The former, the camera, seems to take everything in, to offer neutral evidence, just a forensic man, of what is taking place. But we are reminded, and I think that Satyajit Ray is doing this deliberately, that this is only because the camera is in place, that it is in a place, a space where we are and we will never be. So take a look now at clip 4, which is actually now clip 5 on Indo, please. Thank you. It's obvious that Daya has entered the filmscopic field from the very moment that we see her at the start of the film raising her eyes to look at her husband. But there is in which she becomes, from this moment of deification onwards, an object held in the eye, which the eye cannot hold. On the one hand, there is the alienating stare camera, placing her in the geometric center of its field of vision, proclaiming itself as a prosthesis to the eye, at once its triumph and its grave, as Jean-Louis Comolli put it. On the other, there is our sense of losing, of her passing beyond the field of vision, beyond the threshold of the visible, because she has become someone we no longer know, that her image has become flat, and just her vision, her seeing, is empty. There's a brief exception to this, a moment when she exchanges glances with her husband, when it seems that Uma Prashad knows who she is. Again, could we please have clip 5, now 6? And could we follow up clip 6 with clip 7 so that we don't waste time? So 6 and then 7, please.
Orindo,
Orindo,
are you having trouble? Orindo, let me see if I can. Orindo, Satyajit, do you remember the time?
So, yes, it's written here. Just a minute.
49. I've got it. 49.
Yeah. Yes, it's 49 to 50, and then 54, 56, 54, 30 to 56.
I'll run it
49
straight.
to 50.
I'll run
Yeah,
it
the
straight
two-
up to 56.
No, that will take a long time. 49 to 50, and then 54 to 56 is fine.
Okay. Try. Give me a couple of seconds.
49. Yes, it's 49.
I think Orindo has got disconnected.
Yes, sir. Anindoda has informed that he has lost his connection.
Oh, okay.
If there is a problem, I can just.
Can you see it now?
That's great. Yes, we can. No, not this.
But this.
No, 49.
But this is 49.
Exchange of glances. Yeah, that's it. Exchange of glances with her husband. Yes, that's
Right,
it.
right. I'm stopping here and going to 54.
Yes, and we can stop here and then yes, this is fine.
সঙ্গে তার কোনো অনুষ্ঠানে কোনো ত্রুটি আমার হয়নি, এটা তুমি জানো না, তাও তুমি যাই বলুন বাবা, আমি কিছুতেই বিশ্বাস করি না। আমি কি তবে মিথ্যা বলছি? দেখেছেন, আপনি যখন বলছেন তখন নিশ্চয়ই দেখেছেন। দয়াময়ী দেবী আমি কিছুতেই বিশ্বাস করবো না। তুমি অবতারে বিশ্বাস করো না, এই কথাই তুমি বলতে চাও? বাবা, এই 3 বছরে আপনি শুধু তাকে চেনেন, আমিও চিনেছি। আমি জানি সে মানুষ। এই পূজা আমি হতে দেবো না। আমাকে যেতে দিন বাবা, বাধা দিয়ে কোনো ফল হবে না। এই পূজা আমি খেতে দেবো। মা,
Thank you. Thank you. So you can see that, she exchanged glances with her husband, and her husband, in that very important reproof to his father, says that he knows Daya and knows her. Also, the implication, it's their story as well. He knows her physically, which is, of course, an ancient sense and ancient understanding of the word to know. She knows intellectually. And that sense that he knows her because she's his wife, that they have been intimate with each other. That sense is a very important one in the story and in the film. But it's one that the film and the story both, as it were, are left to leave as Doya becomes increasingly uncertain of her physical being. What is she? Is she a human being? Does she have a physical body, or is she essentially the spirit that has been, that is presumed to have taken its place in her? And at the time of their attempted flight, when Uma Prasad and we try to flee the Jomidar house, this knowledge becomes shadow. The scene itself is a dark scene at night. It's in the middle of the field. There's a kind of shadow. And Doya is uncertain. She says that she is afraid. She looks at the evidence, the physical evidence left behind of the goddess's immersion. Been made of this, that she is frightened when she looks at the frame, the wooden frame where the goddess's image was attached, and it's lying beside the riverbank while the goddess herself has left. Is this a fear of death? Is this a fear of the physical body? It's not completely clear, but there is certainly an uncertainty about Doya herself, about who she is, what she is, and her repudiation of her husband is also a repudiation of the carnal knowledge they have shared. This scene actually is reminiscent of a much more celebrated and deservedly so, scene in Bengali literature at the end of Kapal Kundula, Bankim Chandra's Kapal Kundula, where Kapal Kundula refuses the advances or the attempts to save her by her husband Navakumar and embraces death. And there again, it's not that Kapal Kundula believes herself to be a goddess, but that believes herself to be a dedicated sacrifice to the goddess, and she refuses to acknowledge the kind of claim that her husband makes upon her by virtue of being her husband, of knowing. She refuses that knowing, and that knowing, and the point about knowing, I think, is at the heart of Bankim's Kapal Kundula and in Devi. Who knows God? Who understands her? what is thought? At the end, there is I have a clip here, but I think that most of us are familiar with this scene. Maybe we can see it later. I will just go on and try to get closer to the end of my discussion, and then maybe we can return to this scene if we want to. What does she see as she is worshipped? Does she see herself as if the camera hardens and settles on Daya's increasingly remote and isolated physical body? We recall other women in Rai's films looked at or looking back. The blandishments of the image are overwhelmingly present in a much later film, Ghore Baire, where Bimola is identified with the resurgent nation, an image deliberately visualized so as to coincide with Bimola's physical body, clad in the rich, deep colors of blood and earth. Repeatedly, Bimola's own narrative returns to images into which she seeks to project the iconic figure of her mother as chaste wife, the country that she sees in a nighttime vision, a woman like myself standing expectant, the female body which Nikhilesh wants to clothe in the latest foreign fashions, the sexual woman that identifies transgressively with the nation, not the land, but as beloved. So perhaps in that film, it was inevitable that instead of adopting Gore's open ending, where the extent of Nikhilesh's injury is still unknown, Rai fixed Bimola's fate in and through the image. In a final dissolve, she is invested with the cropped hair and white sari of a Hindu. The novel, none of these projections in the novel written by Tagore, none of these projections is fully realized. The desiring subject, locked into the nest of her ego ideal, is never able to make herself coincide with her self-image, which is, we realize, in each case a projection onto her of male desire. What is reflected back to her from the threshold of the world is what the world wishes her to be. For Daya, the excity of the images within which she is attracted towards the end of the film is ironically offset by Nibaron's joy proclamation that at last he has recognized, Ebar Tore Chinechi, that I know you. Could we have clip 8, please, which is now clip 9? That is 1 minute, 10 seconds, 30 to 1 minute. 1 minute, 10 seconds, 10.5 seconds. Sorry, 1 hour. 1 hour, 10 minutes.
It should be
1 hour, 10 minutes, and 31 minute, 1 hour, 10 minutes. Clip 8. 9 now. Not this.
This is 1 minute, 10 seconds.
Yeah, yes, that's it. That's it. Thank you.
কালী অন্তরে তোর নাই কালী মা নামে কালী মুখে কালী অন্তরে তোর নাই কালী মা এবার তোরে চিনেছি মা এবার তোরে চিনেছি মা যে বলে মা তুই পাশানি তারে আমি বেকুব মানি যে বলে মা তুই পাশানি তারে আমি বেকুব মানি আমি মনে জানি প্রাণে জানি মনে জানি প্রাণে জানি পাষাণে রই কি মহিমা মনে জানি প্রাণে জানি পাষাণে রই কি মহিমা এবার তুলে চিনে সীমা এবার তুলে চিনে সীমা নূতন রূপে নূতন বেশে শ্যামা মায়ে দেখো এসে নূতন রূপে নূতন বেশে শ্যামা মায়ে দেখো এসে নূতন রূপে নূতন বেশে শ্যামা মায়ে দেখো এসে নূতন রূপে নূতন বেশে শ্যামা মায়ে দেখো
Thank you.
Shall we stop? Okay.
Yes, yes. So there are two aspects to this sequence that I would like to emphasize. First, the act as before, in the endless procession of pilgrim worshippers. And the second, the mission itself, caught in its unending serpentine movement over the wide, flat immensity of the Bengal plains. Something that is almost unbearably domestic, confined to the richly furnished interiors of the Zamindar Palace. This is almost the first major reminder of the world outside, a world drawn to Doya's miracle working presence by faith and hope. Fans of the field here, the line of worshippers, maps a reality to which Doya is and is not connected. They come to see her, but she does not see them. The Kali's audience will already have realized that the second part of my title is taken from Lacan's memorable pronouncement: the mirror stage would seem to be the threshold of the visible world. The mirror is the place where we discover that we have an image, and this image is separate from us. That the species or imago does not know to us that it is created outside of ourselves. This is Agamben. If that image is productive of, as in the case of the Greek Narcissus, it is also productive for deep alienation. Lacan places the entry into the field of vision at a point where narcissism and alienation coincide, to the extent that the image is both the and the other. The mirror stage, he writes, is a drama whose internal lust is precipitated from insufficiency to anticipation, and which manufactures for the subject, caught up in the lure of spatial identification, the succession of fantasies that extends from a fragmented body image to a form of its totality that I shall call orthopedic. And lastly, to the assumption of the armor of an aging identity, mark with its rigid structure the subject's entire development. The formation of the bodily ego, involving both idealization and identification, is also, Lacan suggested, a form of misrecognition. In a fine study, Kaya Silverman reflects on the mirror image as a limit, that which cannot be crossed, at the same time as it is a threshold, so that all our visual emotions, gaze, and scream, are inflicted by the narcissism through to enter the scopic domain. And this is an intensely visually narcissistic film. And I think we have to recognize this, in our love for the film, we have to see how unbearably obsessed it is with the surfaces and faces and presences that it records. This notion of the threshold as an invisible but persistent limit is useful, I would suggest, examining the way in which the subject is always confined by its bodily image, with which both confirms identity and produces a deep sense of alienation. Doya, of course, doesn't look at herself in the mirror, which Bimola does in Ghore. She sees herself only in other people seeing her. As I speak, we have come to the close of we have come close to the conclusion of yet another season of worship of the mother in Bengal, with Durga and Kali Puja concluded. Today is the 8th day, as far as I remember, of Jagadhatri Puja. The inventive and transformative visual register of these festivals, especially Durga Puja, embodies a kind of profanation in Agamben sense, whereby the face of the divine is sought to be stamped on mortal, weary, overused female bodies. Migrants, illegal immigrants, farm workers, laborers. This might seem closer to Ghatuk's use of the Durga parallel and the finely tangled threads of symbolic imagery that twinned not only in Meghe Takatara, but much later in Jukti Tokkogop. But Doyamoy's deification in Devi, while seeming to draw upon the same pattern of finding the divine in the human, actually lessening profanation than of consecration. She is sacrificed, surrendered as a sacred object to the all-powerful image of the divine in the same way as she is accused by Parashundari of devouring her nephew Koka. Most feminist scholars, though, would argue that these two processes are complementary, or at least circular. The object of worship becomes the traveling instrument of a developed economy where the human divine enter into a set of transactions or exchanges where women, as Marx said, are commodities. I'd like to make another point at the close. Devi operates on a symbolic economy so tight that the experience of viewing it is almost claustrophobic. Not a word, not an image, not a gesture is wasted. From Doyamoy telling Koka a tale about Rakhoshi, a demoness, early in the film's narrative, to her being accused by Horusundari of devouring him like a Rakhoshi at the close. For the viewer, everything is intensely concentrated and even overdetermined. There is no space to breathe, no random objects or actions that might have served to fill up, in Barthesian terms, the film's reality of it. That respect, too, absorbs us into a kind of involuntary narcissism of the scopic domain. There is nothing in the film that is simply looking. There is no idle looking. There is only a highly concentrated visual regime that forces us to be active and engaged and take cognizance of what is going on in front of us. It teaches us, in this sense, our addiction to the pleasures of looking, all the more because of us, or Shormila Thakur's unearthly beauty and the visual aspect of opulence encoded by the sets created in the Nimtita Palace. The screen on which Doya is placed is at the threshold of the visible world, also because of what lies beyond it. The sensibility of the person, as well as the realm of the numinous, that are not susceptible to representation, but are incessantly identified with with the visual domain. And so, what is unrepresentable is there, but it can only be understood as something that is both unrepresented and represented. That is to say, we are encouraged to take the symbolic as a token, and at the same time, we are urged to look beyond the visual image to what is beyond it and what we can never know. K.R. Ganguly, for example, speaks of the fractal qualities of the image in Devi, simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar, emergent and residual, as well as concrete and abstract, which she places in a larger institutional context of Indian cinema with its own long history. Devi, I would argue, reproves our instinctive attraction to the screen as a site for the satisfaction of desire, while at the same time it reinforces the play cinema in our lives as a space for the playing out of our deepest fantasies. Thank you very much. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Shukriyadi. Madhuja will now moderate the discussion session.
Thank you very much, Shukriyadi. One cannot help but be marveled by the ways in which the kind of levels and the layers that you create and the complex web of conceptual categories that you present in this reading of Devi. I would request questions, and if you could type in the chat box, or you could raise your hand and request you to also be brief. And Sajnidi, you want to comment? No. You have to switch on your mic. You have to switch on your mic. শোনা যাচ্ছে না। You have to. Your mic is still off. Yeah.
Who is speaking?
No, Sajnidi is saying something, but mic is.
Madhuja, I'd request you to read out the questions in the chat box because I haven't accessed it. So perhaps when
there aren't any as yet.
Okay.
So by the time Sajnidi tackles her mic, or she left, yeah.
She has left the meeting. She's lost the connection, it seems. Anybody else?
I have a question. I don't know where to put it in chat. I'm still looking.
No, please go ahead. You can just speak and ask. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Shukriyadi, for that amazing reading of Devi. So many of us are familiar. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the voice. It's an obvious question, but of course this threshold of the visible that we've crossed over into, in which increasingly the film puts us in a corner that we can't actually cross it. It begins with the Oidako, and the Oidako actually then shows us the firecrackers. And already we are a little derailed, right? We were looking at the goddess, and then it's a little indeterminate. Oidako ta ki bolche. And then at the end, when Daya runs towards the river, you have just a voice saying Daya, Daya. And in the middle, you showed us the song, of course, which is about collective desire in the way that, there are so many more people here in the audience who can speak more to where the song places us. So I'm wondering if the voice is as Michelle Shion and others have argued, is the thing that places us very firmly in the wilderness of the divine, and consistently so in the film, where the image is a kind of refusal. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how the voice operates. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vishnupriya. By the way, let me say that I read your paper and was greatly helped by it. Your paper. The question of the voice is something that I have been thinking about, because not just in Rai's films but also in Ghatak's films, the voice, music, the whole, the way in which the voice also expresses longing. It's breath. The voice is breath, isn't it? And there is this sense of something that escapes, speak, and yet you can't call it back. Doya, I actually had that clip as well, that last sequence where she fades, there's that fade, and I'm sure everyone is aware of this. This last scene was shot times, with one at least showing her dead by the river, and the shot was spoiled, so that ultimately Rai decided on the fade into this wilderness of flowers as Doya runs away, and she fades into that early morning, perhaps missed by the river, and like it's not at all clear to me. But that fading of the breath, that somebody is, her husband is calling, and she doesn't respond. She is running away. I think that there is also here a profound sense of something that how you say, unsee what you've seen, so you can't unsay what you've said. And there is in the film itself that contrast between the confidence of Nibaron singing Ebar Tore Chinechi Na, and the uncertainty in so many other voices. Doya's own voice, she speaks very little after her deification. She is barely heard to speak at all. He is seen in a silent film from that point onwards with respect to Doya. Even Horoshundari, who earlier had spoken a great deal, speaks very little after the Siddha is elevated in this way. The film itself becomes less about dialogue. So it's as though dialogue becomes impossible, because you can't understand what other people are saying. Communication has failed. That, I think, is important. It's a very important point you've raised, and I think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Madhuja, there are questions in the chat box.
Can you see it? This chat is not opening. Would you, Monica? Would you
read out the Shamik Das says, Satyajit Rai in an interview concerning this film stated that Devi was against religious dogmatism per se, but not particularly against religion. Your take on this?
You're saying that Satyajit Rai was against religious dogmatism?
No, he apparently said in an interview.
Yes, that he
that this film, Devi.
Devi, I see. The film itself was against religious dogmatism, not against religion. Well, actually, it shows a very deep understanding of religion. I don't think that it is against religion per se. It shows a very deep understanding of the presence of the numinous in our lives and how important this is. I don't, while the sequences of this is unbearably tragic, and everything that takes place is susceptible, first of all, to a rational explanation, and secondly, it can be seen as an oppressive, as a sequence of oppressive actions to which this young woman is sacrificed. Despite this, I don't think the feel of the film is not anti-religion at all. I think that understanding is very, very important. What is it? Aristotle saying that the pleasure of tragedy is knowledge. So it's not that to disapprove of Macbeth or whoever, but that we have to know them. And the pleasure of that work is the pleasure of knowledge. So here too, the pleasure of Devi is the pleasure of our knowledge field, which we are accessing with great intimacy. And I think it's reflected also in Rai's writing of that Sham Devarturi opportunity. He said that he looked for one in Ram Prashad's works, but was unable to find one that was fully appropriate.
Okay, Shubhankar Bhattacharya writes in the chat box, was reminded of Shupriyadi's evocation of Maurice Merleau-Ponty's "What it does not see is what makes it see," what she calls the constitutive incapacity of sight. Kalikinkar does not see, or he will not see Daya for who she is, choosing instead to recast her symbolically. How far does Ray suggest or accommodate the violence that this inflicts on Daya?
Yes. Well, this an essay about the blind spot, and I am not here in this discussion. I'm not talking about scotomization. That is the name, the technical name for the blind spot. Scotomization, and Merleau-Ponty talks about this particularly, the scotomization of vision. That we are unable to see what is in the field of vision, and by sort of amassing details from around what we are seeing, we ignore a spot in vision. But that's a different point. I think that I'm not really here in this discussion. I'm not taking that up. There have been discussions of Baby as a film about scotomization.
I think Tapati, would you switch on your video, please? And Anushtup has questions they will ask.
Tapati?
Tapati, ভিডিওটা শোনা যাচ্ছে
ভিডিও দরকার নেই, যদি অডিওটা
না, ওনার অডিও আছে, বাট we can't hear her.
না, অডিও অফ আছে।
তপতি, তোমার মাইক অন করো। তাহলে কি অনুষ্ঠিত বলবে?
হ্যাঁ,
Thank you for this. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. It's an amazing paper. Shupriyadi, I would like, I was wondering if you could elaborate on the only flashback scene in the film, which in a sense provides a kind of a temporal outside, not a spatial one, from the very austere kind of tight visual regime in the film. And that is when I think it happens a few minutes after Daya refuses to leave in the riverbank. And then she is lying on her bed, and she recalls her early conjugal moments. And it begins with that dialogue, Tumiki Martir Putu. So what do you think about that moment in relation to what you say about the conjugal tension in the film, and Daya's doubts about her own physical being?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. That flashback, as you say, the Pulshajja Raat, I think, when Uma Prasad asks Doya, Tumi ki matir putul. And then there is another little scene of Doya helping him get his head free of his that in the same sequence, I think, these early conjugal moments, as you say. Yes, I think it's important, that particular question, Tubiki Mati Putul, has of course been related by many commentators to the infusion of life into the goddess, the clay image used with life, no longer Putul, Doya, becoming a person, and so on. I think that, while, yes, this does allow us a little bit of breathing space outside this very tight progression, inexorable progression of events towards an inevitable conclusion, as it were. This boy is revived, and then within a few minutes, there is absolutely no space, no time. But it does provide that kind of breathing space. But you must remember that it is also mystic. I find the film, like in Charulata, that memory of her village home, Kalitola, she sees those scenes, and Ravi Vasudevan writes very powerfully and evocatively about the register of the national, which is evoked by Charu's memories of her village home and her somebody Kaishutukat spinning. So that memories here are very domestic, and they are very much part of that, coming into the space of conjugal life, having a relationship with her husband. This relationship is very much there, very much part of the person Doya is, until this happens to her. When this happens to her, that person is progressively lost. It doesn't happen all at once, but progressively Doya fades out, and that is the problem with the film. Actually, the reason why it's not even the same. For example, Uma Prasad comes home by boat. There are some beautiful scenes of the river, the Podda, there at Nimtita, the Podda, and the boat on which beautiful scenes of the river and the boat and so on. But even that doesn't, in my mind, convey what is conveyed by that extraordinary scene of that long line pilgrim worshippers or supplicators, suppliants at the feet of the goddess. And the only parallel, of course, is in the long line of people coming to Angona's, is that her name? Home in Osholishanki. So if there is a parallel, it is with Osholishanki. There is the only other immediate thing that comes to my mind, I think of a long line of people advancing in of something, of succor, hope of succor, at the end of Osholishanki. You can imagine him seeing that is. So, yes, thank you for that reminder, but I still feel that there is this, it's like the open. It's one area of the open in this.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tapati. It's
Tapati,
can I be heard now?
yes.
yes.
I was still trying to figure out why my camera and my audio are being. I was hoping to not visible, but just audible. Obviously, that wasn't possible. Thank you, Shukriyadi, for a really wonderful lecture that took me back, that took all of us back to really the visual kind of perfection, I would say, because there's something, as you said, so tight about every frame and every kind of ways in which Daya is deified, that there's almost no other way in which one could take a position. But the streamlining of that scopophilia is beautifully played out, especially in the clips you showed us. I wanted to actually take up the question of religious dogmatism, which came up in a question, simply because you did end by referring to the seasons of the goddess, which is just over, and the questions of devotion and affect that continue to surround this. And I wanted here to partly come in because I've looked at devotion and affect without wanting to enter the religiosity of the goddess in the work that I've done. And when I think that there is a two-way process, and there's a long history of the humanization of Durga, for instance, or even Kali, and that goes back from your 18th century Ram Prasad into a current commercial ways in which the goddess can be humanized in multiple ways. Every modern woman, every girl, child can be morphed into it. But even the other way where women can take on the identity of the goddess. So there is a lot of fun, lightheartedness, and malleability in which this transaction occurs between the divine and the human. And there's a very long history that takes us from the popular folklore into contemporary commercial use of this affective relationship between the woman and the goddess. And that is done. But in a way, the darkness of this film, both the novel and the film, locates it in a particular juncture of both the writer and the filmmaker's own positioning of really religion as superstition, religion as a kind of distorted belief, and also plays on the blindness of the villagers and their religiosity vis-a-vis the authoritarian possessiveness of Chobi Bishak. What's his name in the film? Kali, God with vis-a-vis Daya. So in a way, it positions this film, the novel, and film, and Satyajit Ray in a particular, if I may say, almost a Brahmo positioning of the dogmatism and the falsity of religious belief. So why I kind of disagree that this shows a deep understanding of popular religiosity, because in a way there's a deep condemnation of popular religiosity that is playing all through, right? So ultimately, if one is to think of the woman turning into stone, which is what happens to Daya. When she's deified, there is no return for Daya. So in a way, that's the closure that every frame you wonderfully say, that Daya's deification and the social conditions, the familiar conditions in which this happened allows her no escape, right? So it's a one-way process. And the only voice of reason is Uma Shankar. And this is a long way where, as an educated person coming from outside, he wishes to rescue. I was reminded even of Nobin and Elokeshi from a very different context. He's trying to rescue the woman from the traps of religion, from the traps of both the sexual and otherwise predation, and take her away. And he fails. Nobin fails, so does Umakanto. But it does place it in a particular moment of a position on the horrors of what it can do. I mean, both the trapping of the woman in this, the dehumanization through her deification, and this is why Uma Kanta saying she is human, she is not divine, the deep separation of the two. And you seem to suggest somewhere that there is a much longer and more complex history of that transactability precisely, where the passage from being one to being the other and the move back is something that many other cultural forms of representation allows. But this novel and the film almost decidedly takes a position against it. So I wanted really more a comment, but I wanted, so in a way, the brilliance of the film, but also the strong ideological position against a certain form of religious superstition and false belief is really very, very pointedly played out and positions it at a particular moment, but I think also positions Satyajit's own take on this.
Again, thank you very much, Tapati. And again, I've learned a great deal from your own work and all your work in the name of the God. So I, understand exactly what you're saying. I understand that your take on popular religiosity, which you say you have tried not to engage so much with religion, but with the cultural, the cultures of consecration and profanation, the circuit of belief and festive celebration, the circuits of celebration through which goddess worship takes place in Bengal. And you feel that this film, in many important ways, seems to set its face that the film does not approve. It does not play lightheartedly with the kinds of transaction that are so common in in the forms of worship with which we're all acquainted. Without being religious people, you can enjoy being at puja and so on. But in this film, you feel that there is a very strong position that Satyajit Ray, perhaps because of his Brahmo background, is taking against what Kali Kinkor does, what others believe in, how Daya is sacrificed, and that she is out no hope, take no way back. All of this is absolutely true. It's true. I just it's a tragic film. It's deeply, in some way, I don't know. I was perhaps in my response to that question, I was hoping for a kind of literary escape from the ideological. I was hoping for, even when a film says something wrongly in the ideological system, and you can, as it were, you are drawn in mythology. Simply, I think even Althusser has that example. Tara Prasad Bai, he doesn't believe in his sister's divinity at all, but by bowing and touching her feet, he is immediately drawn in to the grip of his father's ideological control of events as they play out. So I understand what you're saying. I agree with you that this has a very strong ideological position that it's taking, but at the same time, as I was saying, I'm always looking for that possibility of something gratuitous that is beyond the very, very clear message of the film. That's my only response. Otherwise, I just have to say that you are completely correct in what you said.
Supriya, here is a question in the chat. I'll read it out. So, Shuchismito is asking, as I understand it, the trajectory of Doya's desire is one of constant misrecognition.
Yes.
She identifies with formation of desire outside her, from the devoted wife / daughter-in-law to the goddess of the father's desire. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the ending of the film, where, in my understanding, she seems to be trampling into a new identification with a new desire. I'm curious about this topic here. So there are 2 points that she makes. One is, the stoppage here is of the husband who, unlike Bunkim's Navakumar, does not pursue the wife, the wife's journey, and of the camera that only frames the scene in a rather flattened, depthless shot, circumscribed by the fog. So, the last scene and her new.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have, one immediate response. I don't think it's a flattened shot. That one, where Doya escapes into the mist, running through this field of flowers, I don't think it's a shot at all. I think there are flatter shots in the film with Doya, very vivid, but this one just doesn't seem to be flat. This is one thing. Secondly, I don't think actually, is somebody who is never given to us in the film. Never. She does not frame herself according to anybody's desire. She, at the start of the film, when her husband wants to persuade her to leave the home, go with him to Calcutta or maybe somewhere Pushtin. Pushtin is just, it means the west of India, but where else where she might get a job. She is reluctant to accompany him because what he does not, I think, while he is the one person whom she truly loves. She wants to be a good wife to him, but she is never, I don't think, that she has a clear pattern of behavior at any. Even if she wants to be a good wife to him, there is no real means doing this because he's a student in Calcutta, he goes off, he is no longer there. She is not able to enjoy the kind of conjugal life that sister-in-law, for all her husband's faults, is able to do. Then, she is there being a good daughter-in-law to her father-in-law, but then her father-in-law imposes this monstrous set of conditions upon her, and she's absolutely distraught. At heart, at least, she is completely distraught. Then she becomes a little unsure of herself, and she wonders whether she should, whether she is in fact a God. But we never ever see her enjoying herself sitting on that platform. So I don't think she is molding herself according to her father-in-law's desire at all. I think that she is, start to finish, she's absolutely wretched. She's unhappy. And she's kind of person about whom Freud asks, what do women want? Well, what does she want? We don't know because the question is not put to her, and the answer is not forthcoming because in the film there is no set of conditions in which that question could be put, and any answer could be given by her. What does she want? Nobody asks her what she wants. That's why, and she's rich, unhappy. She's deeply unhappy right through. And that, I think, is an important point about the film. She is not, shown as enjoying her elevation to Godhead. In the story, in Prabhat Mukherjee's story, for a time at least, Doya is confident and secure in the belief that she is healing the sick and, that she has become the goddess. That's it.
So, given the time we have, we will three more questions, comments. One is Sukantoda has a comment, and then Onindo, and then Onishtu. He has something more to say on this book. So Sukantoda, please go ahead.
Yeah. What I wanted to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It follows from the point that Taupati was making. I'm afraid I would rather disagree with Taupati in this matter. I don't think there's actually attacking popular religion as such. Rather, it is attacking a very individual, exceptional distortion and destabilization of popular religion. You see, the general tenor of popular religion is shown as being something latent in society through the generations. Destabilizes it and creates this horrendous destructive situation is when a person who is himself outside the tenor of popular life, his exception here socially, his education, in terms of his great authority over that entire community, he makes his own destructive, orienting take popular religion. And this in turn then destabilizes the general tenor of the community life, extending to the common people, who then begin to sort of line up in the grid. I mean, if I would just briefly make a kind of parallel to something we're seeing in our own society, in our own day, in a much more widely destructive manner. There might be certain ideas which have been latent in society for a long time to no great effect, in fact, perhaps to good effect. Then some particular, there's not so much an individual as a group of persons, some particular interest group takes those generals and gives them some new mischievous twist, some violent, destructive twist perhaps, to serve their own end. And this in turn has a cascading effect in destabilizing society itself to violence and to destruction. I think something similar is happening here. It's not the popular religion which is being attacked as such, but this terrible take of popular in the new context by somebody who is himself sort of placed outside it.
Right. Thank you.
Then it's sort of affecting the popular general community in full.
Thank you very much. I understand what you're saying about this character of Kalikinkar, who is regarded as a Siddha Purush, a tantric, and somebody who's incredibly learned. And he's also inhabiting a highly privileged part of society, and it's he who sets his daughter-in-law up as a goddess. And in a sense, he, by doing so, he opens the doors to blind belief and this kind of hopeful bringing the sick and the dying, so that she should heal them through a miracle. And I understand the very interesting parallel that you're drawing with the Hindutva wave of our own time, so that you're speaking of a specific distortion that takes place in the practice of someone with the means to impose his beliefs on a larger group of people, and then this causes a great imbalance. In fact, I was just thinking when Taupati was speaking, but then I forgot to say this. Taupati says that this young girl, Daya, has been worshipped as a goddess. There's no way back for her. And I just remembered, and unfortunately a bit late, and the Taupati knows all about this, and so do I, that, as I think Satyajit Rai himself said, or people have said in conversation with him, Ramakrishna Dev worshipped his wife Sharada Dev, in whom he saw, Kali herself, and he said to her that in you I see a mother goddess. But, didn't prevent her from leading a reasonably normal life. It appears that they were celibate. I'm not quite sure what those arrangements were. I've never bothered to ask. But honestly speaking, I don't see that Sharada Devi had a particularly difficult life because she was, on one occasion or one or more occasions, worshipped as a goddess by her husband. I mean, there was a way back, just as there is a way back from Kumari Puja and so on. And the way back is something that Taupati is speaking of, that, there is more of a sense of give and take in popular religion, where it may be that for a time somebody is celebrated or revered, but there could slacking off. There other ways of regarding it. There could be fun and frivolity, even with Ram himself. You know, he was regarded as a divine person, or at least as an emanation of the Godhead. But he was himself a remarkable, interesting, funny, warm-hearted, apparently, and Roshik person, and interested in lots of things like prostitutes and courtesans and people who acted on the popular stage in Bengal. You know, went and met Binodini Dash. So, I mean, I think that in popular religion, there is much more of an openness. And there is a kind of a way back, which, as Shukanto, I think, correctly says, in this case is sealed off by the high-handedness of this Jomini. And, you know, he drives his daughter-in-law to madness by treating her in this way.
Yeah.
You know, I remember Ramakrishna Dev, you know, there are these great pictures, photographs of Ramakrishna Dev in what is regarded as a Shamadhisist. But that doesn't particularly alter his lifestyle.
Anita, you had a comment? And
Yes, Supriya, thank you. Very thought-provoking. Lots of things are coming in. I'm trying to be brief. One is commenting on Anushtup's question regarding that flashback scene. Because in cinema, in classical cinema, a character can be individualized. The devices might be, one of three devices might be a close-up. They be full of close-ups. The point of view shot, which is very important, and this particular scene begins with the point of view shot and the flashback. And here the flashback actually plays on one thing, which is interesting kind of conflict, that is of memory. So previously, Kalikinkar actually kind of guaranteed his sanity by reciting a poem, memory, and here is Doyamoi's memory. And when I see this flashback, I can kind of it turns out to be very ironic in that sense, because if we think of this, the sequence of dialogues, তুমি কি কথা কইতে পারো না, তুমি কি পাথরে, তুমি কি পুতুল, মাটির পুতুল, কথা কইতে পারো না, and then when he unveils her face, he says Protima. So and then the tears after that becomes then very kind of bitter tears, one can say. So in a way, Doyamoi kind of gains a kind of insight without having the language, and even that how most probably her husband also formally did something similar in the bridal night. One is this, and another is Vishnu Priya's comment on the soundtrack actually. Because I think now this is something I don't have time to explain, but I always considered the entire film before the hallucination, the reverie or the dream. The entire film is designed like a dream, and one can count how many times the word "ma" is used in different ways. So it's a kind of affective, devotional dream for the viewer. And the viewer has already done with Shormila Thakur what Kalikinkar will do in that sense. This is another comment. And to finally to comment on what Shukantudha said, this is something speculative. The short story, it was set before the permanent settlement, and Sutrita moves it after the permanent settlement. So sometimes I think because Kalikinkar and his elder son looks like.
Hey, কি ভালো বলছিল, তারপর we've lost it.
Hey, Baba. Just froze.
ইস কি ভালো একটা পয়েন্ট।
ভালো বলছে।
Maybe he will return. We will wait for him as far as possible. Let me call him. আমি ফোন করছি ওকে। Okay,
Can I respond to what he said? But then he won't be able to hear me.
yeah. Vishnupriya and Amishtu have something more to add. So maybe they could. Supriya, possibly I'll make a call. And
Sure.
Meanwhile, you could, Amishtu and then Vishnupriya could, ask or comment, make their comment.
Vishnu, why don't you go ahead? I can wait.
I'm hesitating but at a bhalo point থেকে derail করে দেবো। Anyway, but we can get back to it. Shuprati, this was your early comment about Ramakrishna Dev. And actually, you showed us that scene where Uma Shankar sees her through a kind of really a presentation of the scopic, right? Like onek loke there, between people you see her. And I was really interested in Tapati was talking about popular religiosity. And I wonder if the film has a huge critique because of Satyajit Ray himself is so obsessed with these great houses, right? You talked about this with the way the surfaces are delineated. We're often in the courtyard, which is kind of interesting. Prothom jakon ganta shuni, we are in the courtyard, in this space, which is slightly outside. And I think there is a way in which popular religiosity is itself contained. So the song places us in this greater domain of a flexible popular religion where this back and forth can happen, where amra shotti chinechi tomai ma, right? Whereas in this jomidari setting, which captures and sort of extracts the energy of popular religiosity, things are much more, you have no place to move. So I think there's a way in which there's also a critique of the jomidari, dependence on the popular for its religious energy. So, I just wanted to comment on that. Yeah.
That's an excellent comment. Thank you very much. I will add to that. Thank you.
Yes, I'm piggybacking on Bapadi's comment about popular religion. Now, in that, in the very tight symbolic organization of the film, well, Uma is called a Christian, and then his mentor in Calcutta is a convert.
He's a convert, yeah.
Yes, he's a convert.
Yeah.
So, is there another implicit sort of polarization in this particular landscape where this thing called modernity almost inevitably in relation to that popular religion becomes Christological?
Interesting. That's really interesting. And, it shows really how closely Satyajit Ray had studied 19th century debate because, it is very much, I was speaking right at the start, I said that he uses certain elements as a kind of cultural shorthand. That, they are recognizable, legible to those who understand what's being used here as a form of cultural shorthand. Why should his friend Anil Chatterjee, remember this very short scene in a hackney carriage, why should his friend want to marry a widow? Well, it's all because a point has to be made here about widow remarriage. Again, the mentor who is a Christian, a point is being made here about Christianity, maybe Unitism, all kinds of things that form part of that cultural landscape or religious landscape of the 19th century. And Of course, when Kali Kinkor says, "Tomar Christian Shamike tomake tomar kodor kore to," that it's a joke, but it's the kind of joke that is very. I remember a very a person referring to somebody who spoke in English as a Christian. It's a kind of mindset that is being represented here by using these tokens, these little symbolic insertions, all of which have a great deal of work to do in creating that very tight fabric texture of the film. Yes, I think here, but in the 19th century, that debate with Christianity, while it was an important one, wasn't the only one. I mean, there was the debate with Brahmos, there was the debate with Christians, there was different kinds of religiosity, there were different sects within Hinduism. So the Shakto Jomidar, who has the power to recall, to impose his views upon his immediate circle, is unable to control his who is gone to Calcutta, is flirting with dangerous doctrines. The other point, Anindo has come back. So if Anindo would like to complete his question, I had a point about memory to make. Where is Anindo?
Mic to encore.
I've lost the thread actually. But what I was speculating, continuing from Shukanduda's comment, was that if this family, this Kalikinko's Zamindari, has lost the Zamindari during the permanent settlement, and the entire mansion, it's Gothic, haunted kind of thing, it's now a relic. And it gains back the value via this dream now. So somewhere where the crowd can converge in, it becomes a temple actually. So this is something I kind of thought of after Sukanduda's comment. So only that.
That's really interesting. That's absolutely fascinating. All of us, while you were absent, were really valuing the points that you were making, and all of them very, very valuable. I have really nothing much to add to that. Thank you. That's a brilliant point, about the kind of access of value that this aging Jomidar is accruing to him through his daughter-in-law. And for 48 years, I have worshipped the goddess. I have never failed in her prayer, in her rites. And now, at last, she has blessed me with her presence. But it's not just being blessed with her presence. As you correctly say, the focus of the goddess becomes a means through which the Zamindar acquires social value, acquires a kind of extraordinary social, religious cachet. Although, in a sense, of course, he already has this. In the story, we are told that everybody, believes in Param Siddha Purush, and a sort of extraordinary person. And when he recites Raghuvansh too, and you realize, you also have to learn this as children and be able to recite it. So you realize that this wealth of Sanskrit learning that he is commanding, the way in which he is establishing himself through memory, that memory, as you say, to establish the person. It's very interestingly used in Daya's case. It is used, but it is fragmented. It's in a sense fractured. It is increasingly, as the film moves on, it's lost. And that's the problem, that the holding on fragments of the person is, which would be possible through memory, as lost is gone. And the holding on to the idea of the person through the bodily image is also being lost increasingly as she is dissociated from her being, her physical presence. She's not sure that she is who she is. Anyway, that's more or less what I would like to say there. And thank you very much, Anindu. Brilliant set of comments. And
Thank you, Supriya. I think Srinampur has a question.
The conversations just now also reminded me of Supriya's opening comments on Dolce and the kind of scope that you were mentioning. I would have asked if time would permit, I would have opened another kind of Pandora's box, especially regarding the kind of scopic regime that you talk about through Subrata Mittal's interviews, where he talks, the kind of the camera gaze that he constructs, but especially the scene of immersion of Durga and the last scene and the Gavanendranath and Abhinendranath evocation of those kinds of imageries, but we don't have time for that. So Srinampur has one question, and that would be the last question. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Anindoda's fascinating rumination and so it's just my small addition to Anindoda's speculation. So we all know that Ray is always fascinated with his bracketing of the narrative, the famous Mohanagor spark and the bulb. So here the film begins with the goddess looking down upon us. And immediately if we can think of an inter-objective relationship established between the spectator and the goddess, who is observing one common phenomenon. And the goddess is brought down from the noumenal world to a phenomenal world where the spectator and the goddess can inhabit the same inter-objective world. And the film, we can see as a long night, ends with the daybreak and literally the opening of the eye. And that's why the film is overexposed in the end. That the film ends in a certain kinds of overexposure where the opening of the eye and the entering of the light overexposes the film. The body disappears in the mist. So if we can read the film as a bracketing of a dream, that way, that kind of formal reading is possible.
That's a very brilliant comment, inspired by Anindu, but really brilliant comment. I will not say further. I mean, it's a wonderful way of thinking. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Supriya. Thank you, everybody. We could have gone on until 9, but it is not permissible. So thank you very much, and we will be back with the series of lectures very soon. So thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Many
you.
thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya.
Bye.